Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our 2Inspire series. My name is Jeff Knapp, and I'm the General Manager of Payments and Support here at 2Checkout, and I'll be your host for today. Happy to have Marvin Liao today with me. Hello, Marvin. We're excited to have you and join us. Say hello to everyone.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here.
That's great. Hey, Marvin is a partner at 500 Startups, a global seed venture capital firm, and Startup Accelerator based out in San Francisco. Marvin focuses on a variety of business sectors, including FinTech, digital marketing, digital health, Internet of Things, enterprise sales, and SaaS, among others. He's worked in Silicon Valley for 17 odd years here and has held various
20
roles.
now, 20 years actually, 20 years.
20 years. See, I
Yeah.
undersold your experience, Marvin. Sorry. Marvin's worked in Silicon Valley for 20 years and held roles in various departments of sales, business development, operations, and marketing. He's also a mentor of several Startup Accelerator programs in Europe, Asia, and in the US, helping guide teams in a lot of their efforts to grow their businesses. So Marvin, really thank you for taking the time to answer some questions for us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Sounds good. Hey, first question, just to kind of, I guess, warm up here a little bit. What was your first job, and then how did that job lead to this journey of being in the VC community?
Well, yeah, great question. So actually, my first job here in Silicon Valley was actually at a PR agency called Port Novelli, and I lasted about 3 months. I was so bad at my job they fired me on my birthday. So, but then that led me into finding a job at e-commerce company called Libris that raised like $30 million, early stage e-commerce startup that sold used and out of print books. I did 2 years there, and that led me to 10.5 years at Yahoo. Yahoo led me to doing fairly well and just being able to just goof around for a couple of years, and that goofing around kind of led me to VC. So we're doing now being a VC now for about 5 years. So I kind of joke I'm kind of like the Forrest Gump of Silicon Valley.
That's funny. Well, back to your kind of Yahoo experience, right? So what was that experience like, and how did you sort of transition out of, I guess what ultimately became a pretty big company into kind of the startup world?
Yeah, so I spent 10.5 years at Yahoo. So when I joined at Yahoo, we were probably less than 3,000 people worldwide. And when I left Yahoo, it was probably about 15 or 16,000 people worldwide after we'd fired about 3 or 4,000 people.
Right.
And so, it was, working at a big company was, there's a lot of great things working at a big company. There's a lot of not great things working at a big company. One of the good things of working at a big company in growth phase was the stock options. So I'd done all right. And so I basically took 2 years off just goofing around, angel investing. I joined a bunch of boards, advisory boards, and just mentored a lot of startup accelerators and advised, met a lot of VC funds and advised, just goofing around basically. And that kind of led me into this world of just as you mentor and do a lot more of this stuff, I think you just start building more relationships and ties. And I think eventually sort of like, yeah, just like one of the accelerators I was mentoring, I was 500, and guess they felt guilty for me just spending all this time with them. They felt forced to give me a work or something like that, I guess.
That's funny. So when you started, you talk about getting involved with some of these companies. Like, what do you, when you're looking at a business, right? What are you looking for in a business plan or a company that's already kind of up and rolling to be something that you'd want to invest in? Are there some critical elements?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is sort of, I would say it's probably 70%, sort of the team. Like, are these like good people? Are they smart people? Do you know what they're talking about? Or at least they have some process to go and figure out answers to questions, questions about the market, or they're systematic, right? And I'd say it's probably 30% on like, okay, can this be like a huge business? Speaking as a VC, right? Like speaking as a VC, can this be a huge multi-billion-dollar business, or has the potential to do that? Is there a clear sort of like head, sort of wedge or vector into the market? And also the thing that I care the most about, which is, what's a go-to-market strategy, right? Like, what's a customer acquisition strategy? What's a go-to-market strategy? Do they even have any clue about that, right? At least some semblance of some thoughts or hypothesis on what that looks like. That's probably what I care the most about.
Yeah. When you're listening to a company pitch you on their go-to-market strategy, are there kind of key items in there that says, okay, these guys got it, or you know what, I better run like hell because these guys are just kind of full of it?
I think a big part of it is just sort of how well they understand the competitive landscape. I also think it's a combination of how well they understand the competitive landscape and how differentiated they are of what their offering is. And I think the other big part, in my opinion, is just how well they understand their customer or the customer segments that they have. And so, when I meet a founder and I ask them like, who's your customer? Like everybody, like I run and hide, right? Because you're like, yes, this might what you're building could be used by everybody eventually, but in the beginning it's like who is going to be the customer segment or the customer that you're going after, and the more narrow that it is the better, because it's more likely to you're going to build just a much more suitable product, and hopefully in the long run they'll be able to expand that segments into sort of like new segments, right? But in the beginning, I think for a lot of your audience, it's not about trying to serve everybody. It's about serving a very, very specific niche in the beginning, because if you cannot do that, like you have no chance.
No, that's fantastic. And out of how many companies will you talk to before you'll finally decide to invest in one?
Yeah, it varies, right? I think that's kind of like the law of numbers, right? And so, for example, there are weeks where I might speak to anywhere between 20 to like 80 companies and not find anything that's interesting. And then a week later on, I'll meet like 10 companies and five of them are very, very interesting. So it really varies, but I would say just yeah, it's all over the map. But I would say probably for every like 50 to 100 companies I meet and talk with, I might only be interested in maybe one or two.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. So when you do get involved in one or do invest in one, how do you engage? Or does it vary by company, or do you have kind of a particular model that drives your engagement?
Yeah, so I would say if it's through the accelerator versus sort of just a direct sort of investment, if it's through the accelerator, we spend 4 months with them, right? They sit in the office with us, we work with them, meet with them every week. We have specific content and speakers for them, so we're very, very hands-on. I think when it comes to sort of a direct investment and seed deal, a lot of it's really dependent on the founder. So a lot of times I call it sort of a hands if, I'm not hands on, not hands off. It's sort of like if you need help, ping me, jump on a call, meet with you, talk through whatever you need to sort of talk through, whether it's fundraising, and the areas I tend to help the companies tend to be more on the fundraising, more on the team, like hiring and firing, and a lot of it's really the sales and marketing stuff because of my background, right? Of just like how you're thinking through the customer segments, how you're thinking through positioning, thinking through pricing, thinking through sort of like the various customer acquisition channels, like on the consumer side or B2B side. So I spend a lot of time with them on this stuff.
Yeah. And then how do you, as you're doing that, how do you identify, red flags or areas that need extra attention, or things that could be problematic, and head them off?
I think a lot of it is sort of like for me the biggest thing is just sort of do they have a clear focus and clear prioritization on sort of what is important. And a lot of times where I just think like, well, wait a minute, you're going to be running out of money, but you're talking about all these other random things like that. You clearly kind of have your priorities wrong, right? So if you're starting to run out of money, like either got to figure out your customer model, like like starting to charge customers maybe more than you're charging them right now to sort of make up for that, or maybe you need to start thinking about the fundraising piece, right? And so a lot of times it's just asking a lot of questions to help them get focused to figure out what the right answer should be.
So, I mean, you've mentioned a few things around sort of, competitive landscape and market focus. Are there a set of common struggles that you see the leadership of startups, deal with that are universal that you could offer as a kind of advice to our audience here?
I think one of the things that a lot of startups do a terrible job is managing cost structure. Like they're not as frugal as maybe they need to be, or they're spending money on things that probably are not important. The other thing that I think that startups don't do a great job on is recruitment, of just being much more discerning. And so that view of like, hire slow, fire fast. And unfortunately, it tends to be sort of the other way around, which is sort of like hire fast, fire slow, which is just, hiring is really, really hard. Firing is really, really hard. And I think it's sort of like, for me, a good founder is really decisive about what they do, right? So if you've found that you've made a hiring mistake, you have to fix it right away, because that can spell, at least it'll be very, very painful for the company to sort of like, if you let it linger for too long, it's a drain on your money and your energy.
That's really, really good advice. What when you get into these and you talk about how go to market particular is so important, like what are some thoughts or strategies or tactics that these startups can use to really attract those first customers and get the momentum going?
I think in the beginning, it's just sort of like every single new business owner should be over indexing their time on talking to customers or at least potential customers. Because in the beginning, you have a hypothesis and all the data points, what you're looking for are patterns, right? So the more potential customer, user, or customer conversations you're having in the beginning, the better off you are in the long run. And I think it's a process that I think too many founders just don't spend their time on because I think what you should be doing is the more conversations you have, the more patterns you actually find. And there's both negative and positive patterns, right? Like these are why people would not buy your product, right? And if this one thing comes up over and over again, that helps you fine tune your product, sort of propose, sort of like proposition, right? And actually fixing your product. Or like there's a lot of things that they really, really like about your product. And that's maybe what you should be using as your hook to get them in.
Yeah. Good. It's one of the things we talk to merchants and customers a lot, and there's different views on how to apply metrics to the business. What are your thoughts on metrics, particularly at the startup stage? Is it important to have a
I
real?
think it's super important, right? And one of the frameworks we use and think a lot is just like our metrics, right? The funnel of acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and really understanding sort of like where your problem is, and that metric should be really dependent on where that problem is. Like you have an acquisition issue where you can't get anybody coming in, so then the metric should be very, very specific for that. But then once you sort of find that you're able to sort of like do well in that part, maybe the next stage is, okay, great, you're getting a lot of traffic and getting a lot of people into your business, but nobody's staying or nobody's buying. Like maybe digging in, having the metric that digs into that. And so I think like metrics, at least having 1 to 2 metrics in the beginning, are really, really important that everybody in the company should know and be looking at, right? And if a project is not increasing that metric or driving that metric, then that's how you drive prioritization.
Sure. No, that's really, really good feedback, which kind of leads me to the next one. When you're thinking about bringing in people, or you talk about that sort of hire fast and fire fast. So to what degree is really crisp, sort of rapid decision making, an important skill versus kind of deep expertise in a field? Is there a
I mean,
any thoughts on that?
deep expertise is valuable. I think it's valuable. But like everything is a double-edged sword, right? Because there's also a lot of blinders of just sort of like, well, this is the way it always has been done. Maybe we should just keep on doing it this way. Versus sort of when you come in without that deep experience or expertise, you're actually able to look at problems in a sort of a brand new sort of way, which I think is really valuable. So I don't think there's a right or wrong, but I think a lot of times just being able to question on a regular basis, right? Everything that you're doing, and keeping an open mind that there could be sort of like new ways of doing stuff that are better ways and more efficient ways. And at the end of the day, also being decisive and not being stuck in analysis paralysis, because it's so easy to just keep on putting off hard decisions because you're trying to collect more and more information, right? And I feel like that's kind of an issue of just sort of the way that we went through school, of just like trying to sort of being right versus sort of, I think the best thing is actually trying to find the right questions.
Yeah, that's really good. So when you see like a founder who's beginning to attract some seed capital or move on, what challenge do they seem to run into most as it relates to the maturity of either their decision making or being open to other ideas? Do you have any particular experience there?
I mean, it's all over the map, right? I think the biggest issue is just I think a lot of founders are just not good at telling their story or telling the story of their business well. Not really understand their numbers and metrics really well, I think is a big problem. And also just not, I would say sort of like not being decisive in general, right? Like I think if you decide to fundraise, like you need to be, that's all you're spending your time on, right? So this ability to focus, right? Or what they end up doing is they kind of doing the fundraising, half run their business, half doing fundraising, and then both don't really go in the right direction.
Sure, sure. So is there, you've obviously worked with, tons of companies in both an investor and, an accelerator role. So are there some that, you can name names if you'd like to, that have really impressed you with, kind of the way they've gone about their business and why? And then maybe some others that, might be examples of ones that you would want to learn from the other way.
I would say I would probably want to focus more on the positive than sort of negative. But there's one company, a company called Shippo, that was my first batch, and two young founders, like in the early 20 somethings, and focusing. What they do is they're an API for shipping, right? So, for example, the biggest challenge that a lot of e-commerce companies have is shipping is just super expensive, and so they allow e-commerce companies to do, sort of to get network effects of getting cheaper shipping, right? So the more folks who use their product, the cheaper they can use to sort of like they can drive the pricing down, right? And so kind of like network effects and winner take all, which is kind of interesting, and just super smart founders, really thoughtful about the market and the problem they're sort of solving, because they faced it themselves in their previous startup that they tried that ended up pivoting into this business. I think just thoughtful about like we're really, really good about getting feedback and getting, from customers, getting sort of like feedback from us, but also being prepared to make their own decisions. And also being decisive when it came down to like, once they made a decision, they made it work. Just like that was a great example. I think like, because I know founders are like, 10, 15 years older than they were, just not as effective, and just a really, really effective team. So when they came in there, maybe 3, 4 people, and now they're probably about 100 people now. So it's been about 5 years, and just watching them mature and grow, and also just being willing to ask for help. Like, if they needed help, they were really, really willing to sort of ask for it. I think a lot of founders, particularly male founders, tend to just run and hide, right? And just, their pride gets in the way of asking for help, and which is just, I think, is a weakness.
Sure, sure. Hey, well, it's interesting you mentioned that business model, because that's one that sounds like it would be easy to get carried away with, like all the millions of customers, right? They could serve everybody, right? Because of a network effect. How did they narrow down the initial market focus and define the competitive landscape and stay focused?
I think that they were just really good about talking to customers on a regular basis and having very, very good customer profiles in the beginning, right? Of like, this is the archetype of the customer that we want. If it doesn't fit with this customer, like in the beginning, they did some experimentation, right? And found like, well, this specific archetype is better suited for what we have right now. So let's just focus all our energy on sort of like getting these customers through these various channels. And I think that's what made them so effective.
That's great. That's great. So when you're thinking about, is there a particular like type of company right now or vertical right now that you're really, really focused on in terms of?
Not really. I mean, we're generalist investors, so like I'm still interested in like fintech and digital health. I still look at a lot of SaaS and enterprise software, marketplace businesses. So I look at pretty much everything.
Yeah, you got a good story about one that got away. Maybe you didn't like them and they took off to be
Oh,
wild.
so many of them. I mean, I could spend hours talking about all the awesome companies I missed.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, a little bit about you in addition to your perspective. So, tell me, like when you kind of, get up and get going during the day, what's a productive day look like for you?
Well, I think routines are important, and so a good day for me, especially when I'm not traveling, is get up in the morning. I try to get up 6 or 6:30 in the morning. I have a regular sort of like workout routine. I meditate as well too, which is very, very helpful. So between the exercise, meditation, and sort of that's helpful. Then sort of help my, so I have a young daughter, so basically, just having breakfast with her, dropping off at school, and the best case scenario is in the first sort of couple hours, just you're spending time reading, and just like catching up on email and things, and then I basically have meetings pretty much the rest of the day. And so I would say maybe I over-index on the meeting side, so it'd be good to. I wish I had a little bit more time to sort of read and think, because that's if you think about what a venture capitalist job is. It is, of course, trying to find awesome companies and helping them. But I think a big part is also thinking about the future. And that's something I feel like I don't know if I do enough of that. And I would like to sort of spend more time just really just reading and thinking, right? And I that's a big priority for me this year to try to do more of that.
Well, great, great. Are there, some work tools or personal tools that you take advantage of to help you kind of prioritize and get through your day?
I feel like one of the important things in the morning, or at least even before you go to bed, like having at least a list of like 3 to 5 things that you think about where it's like, I absolutely need to get this thing done. And so looking at your calendars the night before, which this is stuff I wish I followed a lot more religiously. But one of the things, at least in the morning, getting up, looking at your calendar, making sure that everything's sort of like, okay, what are the things I need to focus on? Having at least like the 2 or 3 things that you absolutely have to get done. That's probably something that's important. The other thing that I've been trying to build in as well too, at least trying to build in sort of an hour of sort of, and even an hour of the day in the beginning of just like working on maybe just like non-business related things or non-work related things to at least free your mind up a little bit more, because I feel like sometimes being too ingrained into your work and your business sometimes is not a good thing and does not open up, sort of the creativity that you probably need to be more effective.
Sure, sure. Um, in the spirit of, asking for help, like who was inspirational or acted as a mentor to you as you were sort of evolving through your career?
Well, I was very, very lucky, right? I think when I was at Yahoo, I had, very, very, very good bosses that helped me out. At Yahoo guys like Prashant Mehta, who's now a very successful VC in India, guys like Greg Coleman, who used to be head of BuzzFeed, like John Swartz, guys like David Koh. These are all very successful business people. They were incredibly helpful to sort of help me out in my career. At Alibris, a guy named Paul Banis, who is now almost like a father figure, father figure brother. He was instrumental in helping me sort of as a person, a human being, an investor. Well, less an investor, but sort of more of a human being, a sort of business person, marketer. At least as an investor, like guys like Tim Chang, who's a very famous investor, Mike Maples, people I respect a lot that were incredibly helpful to me.
Sure, that's great. Is there a particular, piece of advice that you were given along the way that you kind of lean on even to this day?
Yeah, don't have heroes, be your own hero.
That's good. That's
Yeah, and the
good.
other advice I'd say, like, don't meet your heroes because you end up being disappointed.
Yeah, of course, of course. Like to stick to those ideals rather than the reality, right?
Yeah, but I think it is helpful having heroes. Like, so the way and this is advice given ironically by people I consider heroes, but you understand that once you meet them, they're kind of just like there there's good thing, like they have their flaws, but also they're just like you and me.
No, that's great. Are there books or other resources that you go to kind of continue to kind of push your knowledge or kind of add to your perspective?
I mean, I read everything. And I think this is something that's, I think, critical for every human being in general. We're so lucky, right? If you think about the condensed knowledge in a book, right? Like, whether it's a science fiction book, whether it's a philosophy book. So I'm a big fan of like Marcus Aurelius, right? The Stoics. Tim Ferriss. I think the study of like excellence in athletics, in thinking, in medicine, in business, in academia, in art. I think there's a lot to learn from that, right? So I read everything by Tim Ferriss. I listen to his podcasts. I just think I read and learn from everything. I'm a big fan of Baltasar Gracian's like the world of art, in the art of worldly wisdom. He was a Jesuit in the court of the Spanish sort of empire back in like the 1600s or 1700s. And this book I read every single year. And so I read a lot, as you can probably figure out. I think it's critical to just surviving, I think, this really busy world that we have.
Sure, sure, sure. What hobbies or interests do you have that kind of let your mind reset and take you away from the daily grind?
It's reading. I just pretty much read, right? I read, I have an exercise regime, and it's fun being with family, right? Like I don't, that's something I don't do enough of. And it's something I really need to, something not I need, I am going to prioritize, and I'm prioritizing this year.
Sure, sure. Is there a piece of advice, we just mentioned one about heroes, but some particular advice to some entrepreneurs if they're seeking some venture capital or vice versa, venture capitalists that are looking for companies to invest in that maybe you would offer and pass down?
I mean, what I would say is, I think, particularly for founders, I probably can't give too much advice to investors. I've only been doing this for 5 years, but I would say, particularly for founders, of just like really understand whether venture capital is really the right tool or mechanism for you. Not everybody should raise VC money because, I think what I tell founders, like, think about why you started this company, right? It's you did it for freedom and because you didn't really want to have bosses. I think the minute you start taking VC money, like, you kind of have a boss, right? And their interests aren't always aligned with yours. And so just think very, very carefully about going down this path. And this is something I tell my companies here too.
Sure, sure. So how important is that, alignment between, the investment interest and the go-to-market strategy and objectives of the company when you're
I
looking?
think it's super critical, right? I've seen companies die because they take money from the wrong investors. And
That's
there are
good.
a lot of bad investors out there who aren't necessarily like I think the best relationship between investor and a founder is it's a partnership, right? And I think everywhere where there's an imbalance is never good. It's just like marriage. It's literally I think the investor and founder relationship is literally like a marriage, and it
Right.
needs to be treated that seriously.
Are you able to tell, relatively quickly into a venture, even one that you've already invested in, that maybe you have a misalignment and it's time to do something different?
Yeah, it's hard, right? I have to say, I think in my program and invest, sort of, we've invested in, at least even in myself, I have probably over 400 companies in my portfolio, and it's hard to tell. Like sometimes we have companies we've been with them for 4 months, and in the end they end up cheating us, right? And I'm not going to go into detail. I just had like two situations happen the last, which is disappointing, right? Because you invest so much time and energy, and then for them to sort of do something that is very non-ethical is very disappointing. So it's just people are people, right? But thankfully, that's a very small number in the bigger scheme of things.
Sure, sure. What other advice or thoughts would you leave our audience with? I guess I mentioned typically, kind of small to mid-sized businesses that are kind of looking to get a leg up on the competition and ultimately grow. What thoughts would you leave them with based on your experience working with, 400 plus or companies?
Yeah, I think that one thing that all startup founders or small business founders aren't spending enough time talking to customers, number one. And second part is just like learn basic skills of like maybe it's not like the basics of marketing and sales are mission critical for like everything that you do. And even I'd even go further, just like learn copywriting. Like I think copywriting is critical and it is incredibly helpful whether you're going down the sales route or whether you're going down the marketing route, and it will help you in your life in general.
That's actually really good advice. Actually, I've heard that one before, so thanks for passing on. Well, hey, thank you for your time. I really appreciated the time to talk to you, and particularly all the insight that you offered to me and anyone else who's going to listen to this podcast. And thank you, Marvin. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I hope it's helpful for everyone, and thank you very much for having me.
Great. Thank you.